Welcome back. I hope you're feeling a little refreshed after that nice meal that Bengal Club has served us. And those of you who haven't had a chance to have it yet are welcome to do so after the session is over. We are now starting Poetry Cafe. Poetry Cafe is a section within the overall festival which is focused wholly on poetry and poets of the city. We are very, very happy that we could start Poetry Cafe today with the release of a book, Where Stories Gather. This is Karuna Ezra Parekh's new book of poems, just about out in time to catch this festival, which I'm personally delighted with. And Parumita Shaha will be in conversation with her when they release the book. Karuna Ezra Parekh is a poet and writer. She's a former television anchor and model. She's already done a session with us earlier today as a moderator. And she is known for her activism, a lot of which is seen also in the poetry that she'll share with us today. She has written for Vogue, Tehelka, The Wire, Lonely Planet, and many others. She has a novel out, The Heart Asks Pleasure First, and that came out only in 2020. And hot on the heels of that, this year, we are now ready to launch her first book of poetry, Where Stories Gather. And thank you and congratulations. Hold it up. It will be nice to see the cover. Parumita Shaha is Director, Arts Forward Ideas and Events. She is a performer and an interdisciplinary art and culture architect using solution-driven thought, communication, methodologies and art to create communities of tomorrow. She is a Hatha Vinyasa trainer and contemporary dancer who has been performing across the world for more than 20 years. Parumita, thank you for joining us. Have you got your own copy of the book?
I have.
So why don't you both hold it up together and we can take a nice photograph of the book. The master whooper of all such events, unfortunately, is not here. That's my daughter.
Yes.
Before we get into the conversation, we'd like to play a brief video which has been created for the book launch.
माइक को यहाँ पे लगा ले ब्लाउज में.
Is that okay? Now I'd like to invite Paramita and Karuna to start their conversation.
So I'm going to start by reading the opening poem from the book. Am I audible? Because I was told I was a bit soft last time. I'm going to start by reading the opening poem of the book, and then we can take it from there. Tell me of your tidal dreams and the anarchy budding in the rich earth of your heart. Tell me the rogue recipes you have concocted quietly in this time of sweet stillness, and the tune of the slow jazz you have danced to alone in your living room that has had no visitors in months. Tell me of all the plans you held fast to your chest, then crumpled up as the future fell away, and tell me how you later took your list back from the bin, pressed out its creases, and refolded it into origami discernible to and unfoldable by only you. Tell me of your meditations on solitude, and how it is this coarse thing we are only just befriending. Tell me all of how you breathed life into a world you did not recognize, but made human the only way you knew how. Tell me, and I will tell you all mine.
So it feels, I hope I'm audible as well. It feels really special to be doing with you again.
It
With
feels
you.
like a bit of a tradition now because
It's a small bit of a ritual with me doing this for Heart Asks Pleasure First last year. And I think that's where my first question is, that was 2020, this is 21. Has the pandemic made you prolific?
Thank you. That's a very kind way of putting it. So that poem I just read. Of course, it did reference the last year or two that we lived through, and I wrote it in that time. But it's fairer to say that I have a very brilliant agent and team who planned it this way. So I know it looks, it looks quite amazing that I had a novel out last year and I have a book of poetry out this year. But of course, the truth is that very few of us can actually write that fast. So the book of poetry is, it's more of a collection of pieces that I've been working on since, I'd say, 2014, 2015. And I revised my work, obviously, before it came into this sort of final form. But it's less prolific and more, the pain of time. Yeah, if that makes sense, yeah.
So I've known you as a poet mostly to start with.
Yeah.
And then of course to read all your poetry on Instagram. So how does this journey feel, I think, for all of us to slowly move from online to offline in a certain way, and to move from the social media page to an actual book, knowing that the thing on the internet will probably stay forever and the book probably won't, maybe this hard copy, but still this, to hold it in your hand means so much. So how has that journey been for you?
So, it's interesting you say that you knew me as a poet, and I think my public profile was very much that of a poet first, because I used to put my poetry on the online, I'd put it on social media and such. So I think people were a bit surprised when the first book was a novel. I think the expectation was that it would be a collection of poetry. But once again, that was kind of, I wouldn't say it's strategic, but it felt more natural to do it that way. And as a result, we've gone in this direction. And then there was a pandemic in the middle. And so while I moved from the online to, to the offline, and initially, obviously my first poems were all offline, all of us are writers, scribbles first, and then onto the online and then the offline. The world is doing the same, so it's a very strange sort of time for me where, it's reflected in the greater picture as well. It's interesting, and you say, you spoke about this idea of what is permanent. And there's a line I have, in fact, in my introduction that I'm just going to read out. And it says, "Funny how something on the internet lasts forever and every copy of a book can be destroyed. Yet it is in the tangibility of the latter that we dock permanence." And it's funny because once something is online, it's very hard to get rid of it unless you're the government. And so, but holding this actually makes it real for me. And I think there's also this idea that people who are writing poetry on Instagram, that it's not real poetry. And there's a sense that this is very literary. And I am aware of that, and maybe I fall prey to that as well, but there is great joy in holding something that feels permanent and that is tangible. So,
yeah. It feels like a book, whereas the stuff on Instagram definitely,
exactly.
It just doesn't.
Yeah.
And I always wonder how they're Insta stories.
Yeah, maybe
and they just disappear.
Also, it's a lot to do with our attention span, I think, because on the online, everything is very fleeting. You read it once and it disappears, and you might save it, or I don't know how much people go back to that. But I think at least we are very much from the generation where you hold a book and you underline things and you mark it and you go back to it.
Fold a page.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why this book, my team and I, we decided to put a ribbon in it, and it's very old school, but we thought it's poems, you want to go back to them, you want to read them again and again, and it's, a novel you don't always reread, but poetry you go back to. You always have a favorite poem that you read again and again. So, we were very insistent about that marker being there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think also about poetry, I don't read poetry in order.
Yeah,
like I wouldn't read
absolutely.
it from the first page downwards,
Yeah.
and I would just open it up somewhere
Yeah.
and read and then flip back and forth. So I think that ribbon's going to be wonderful. I think the next question is more of a technical question, but it was also a question that as process, as somebody who puts words to paper, how do you veer between verse and prose, and because you've been writing both verse and prose, and I think even for your novel you had written so many drafts, etc., and that was also a fairly long process as far as I recall. So you've been doing this, being on both sides for a long time. So have you been dreaming in verse, or?
I do, that's a beautiful way of putting it, and I really do dream in verse. I think that's exactly it, and it's why my novel as well is written in, and we had spoken about this in our last session about the novel, that it's written with a certain rhythm to the writing, and very often there's a sense of rhyme to it as well. And I think that is because I am first and foremost a poet. And I'm in love with words, so it's very hard for me to separate the two. The way, a sort of metaphor I can give is that, it's like painting murals and painting miniatures, but, they look completely different. But at the end, the same hand can do both, perhaps.
But there is still a process, a certain grammar that you might follow.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, is there like a process that you use to do that, or do you just let it flow?
I think the process of writing poetry, I think it is a lot more fluid, because the form allows for that. With a novel, of course, the structure was, the vast structure is very important, right? But with poems, I think you can be a little more fluid with that, which I enjoyed actually. It's not easier. People think it might be easier to write shorter form, right? But it's not necessarily, because sometimes in a matter of 15 words, you want to convey something really important.
Far tougher, isn't it?
Thank you.
Yeah, it is far tougher. Because you have so much space and time to deal with that, and you have to make it at one go. I think a lot of us here and those on the live stream would have read your Paris poem. And I still really love those lines where you say a prayer for Paris by all means, but pray more for a world that does not have a prayer, for those who do not have a home to defend. And I think this was 2015?
Yeah, 2015 it was.
And this became an internet sensation, became viral. How did that shift things for you? Because 2015, this is 21, so you would have been still on your path of finding or making a sort of path for yourself.
Yeah, that was a very overwhelming time, because I wrote this poem, and at that point I wasn't sharing that much poetry online. I had started a small project for poetry, but I wasn't very serious about it, and then I shared this one poem after the Paris bomb blast and attack. And it went viral within hours, and it was very overwhelming for me, because suddenly the whole world was reading this poem, and I was getting emails from Mexico, and I was getting messages from all over the Arab world, and it was I still find it hard actually to talk about it, because it was a very strange time, and I've still not made much sense of what took place then. It definitely put me a little on a global sort of stage in some way, and I'm very grateful for that. But more importantly, it made me take poetry seriously.
Seriously.
And I realized that poetry can be so impactful, and that, you know, no one is going to read or not, you're not going to have a really long academic book on the problems of the refugee crisis go viral. You know, there's just not enough people who are going to invest in that. But, you know, a 15-line poem can do that, and it can convey that if correctly written. It can make people angry, you know, it can make people sad, it can be evocative. And I started taking it seriously, and it was the first time, because I read this in, you know, all over the world's internet. I read Karna Parekh, poet. It was the first time I said, oh, I am a poet. You know, I write poetry became I am a poet. And so I transitioned to that, you know, it was very empowering in that sense. So yeah,
Also, I think
that was the change for me. And it made me politically more charged as well, I think. Yeah.
because I think in most other forms of art, there is such a risk of appropriation of these issues.
Yeah.
And I think in poetry, it's the least because you're writing
Yeah.
from the heart.
Oh,
and
definitely.
you're from a space of feeling and not
Yeah.
trying to understand so much of what's going on, but
Yeah.
it's more a response.
It's a passion response.
Yes, it
yeah,
just comes
yeah.
from the heart. So I think there's less risk of
Yeah.
going
So
wrong
well said,
there
yeah,
because
yeah,
this happens in art all the time.
Oh, definitely. And it's problematic,
It's
you know.
very,
it really
very,
is,
very,
yeah.
very, very, very problematic.
But poetry is very raw in that sense, yeah.
And therefore so very human.
Yeah.
So my favorite poems are your poems that are imagined around nature, conservation, and sustainability for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But I haven't read the book yet. I just read a few. But what are the themes that you've tackled? And
So that's definitely one of them, because
I'm hoping from the cover.
yeah. So, like all poets over the ages, I am deeply moved and inspired by nature, and I think that sense is very urgent, especially in the world we live in today. So a lot of the nature poems are, to me, they read as love poems. You know, it's sort of, these are love songs to a dying earth, right? So there is a whole section of those poems. There's many poems on womanhood, you know, my own questions of feminism, my sense of being a woman, my experience of the feminine. So there's poems that tackle that. There's love poems, of course. There's poems of heartache, and there's poems of joyous love. And there's a pretty hefty section of my political work, which you know, for me, it's my most important work, I'd say. So, yeah, it's not always the poems, those poems aren't always the most popular ones, but it was very important for me to include them. So, yeah. Yes.
I think we are.
Yeah, I think we
have
actually have to wrap up. This
wrap
is a
up.
quick session,
So maybe
sadly.
the last question quickly, and then you can maybe read a poem.
Yeah,
So
and
of
maybe-
course, Karuna the poet. So we can go on for a little.
Perfect, lovely, great, thank you.
So maybe we can then take a question from the
Yeah,
audience
we
after
can
I
do- yeah.
my last question. Okay, so my last question is again, it's a question of who you are, because poet, novelist, activist, and I think we know all these people well, because I think even the things that you model for or the brands that you maybe work for are also brands that you truly know and believe in. I think this is something we discussed last time when we were talking at Home Truths. So who is the real you, and how does that real you find itself in all these expressions of trying to say what you have to say?
If I'm to be absolutely honest, I'm not sure myself, and I think it's an amalgamation of these people, and I think it's very fair to say that I am on that journey as well, and I think I'm constantly figuring it out myself. I'm trying to figure out the balance. But one of the things I have found, especially in my move to Calcutta, which is a much quieter, more, I think, introspective city than Delhi ever was for me, is being essentially true to myself. And I think that's very important. And I say this not just for myself, but I say it for anyone who's sort of seeking the beauty of a creative life or a creative path, that I think the most important thing is to be true to yourself, whatever that is. And that can be a shifting thing, of course. You know, none of us are just one thing, and none of us remain one thing. We're humans, you know, we're meant to progress. And so I do think being true to yourself in that moment is very important. And I think we live in a world that actually currently does not encourage that. You know, we're living in a world where like falsehoods are encouraged. You know, Photoshop is encouraged. Photoshopping of the soul and the heart is encouraged almost. And I think that it is part of a creative life to strive against that constantly. And that's kind of what I try to do with my work.
Thank you for saying that. And I think it's there in the title of the book, where stories gather, and I love that verb of gathering.
Gathering, yeah.
Because in dance, we always say that we gather and then we send. So,
how beautiful.
So that's how we use it. And therefore, we are sending forth to you if you have any questions. We don't have too much time.
Should I read one first? Or should I do that at the
I
end?
think we should quickly do a question if they have any.
Yeah.
How much does the name affect you? The name is still
It's the curse of my life.
I think there is a question at the back.
Sorry, we'll just send the
Maybe
mic.
we can send a mic to
the
it.
back. Yeah.
Political view.
Politics with us.
What my political views are? My answer to that would be to buy the book.
This is evasive. I had made a direct question. I believe a direct answer would be more welcome. This is evasive.
My political views lean on the sides of freedom. I hope that helps.
If Sunil.
Yes. Who are my favorite poets? Amongst the contemporary poets, I really like the work of Akhil Katyal. And in fact, we have an author here, Mehek, who we were in conversation earlier, who's named a book after one of his poems. I think it's hard to be a young woman writing in this country and not be affected by Tishani. Tishani Doshi's work is, it's profound and beautiful and moving. I love Shampurna Chatterjee's work. And because of her, I've been introduced to Joy Goswami's work, which is really, so those are some of them, yeah. I also would love to say there's a writer called Fatima Ashkar, and she has a very slim book of poetry, and it's called When They Come For Us. And I think it might be one of the best books of poetry I've ever read in my life. She lives in the States, but she talks a lot about partition and the legacies of it, and I mean, it's something that I often can't read more than 1 or 2 pages at a go because it is so deep and so moving, and I cannot recommend that book enough. So.
Fatima Asghar.
Yeah, Fatima Ashkar.
Okay.
Would you like to finish with
A
one
poem.
last poem?
I think that would be lovely.
one poem.
Why don't you
Okay,
do
I'm
that?
going to actually read something that is in the political poetry section, but I think it's not overtly political, but I think it's relevant in that sense. I find the rituals of religion, their stories and secrets, so beautiful, like small doorways to the divine. Who was the first person to say, the doorways to my home are better than yours, more beautiful and ornate, larger, more intricate? And how come they didn't say instead, come friend, you take your doorway and I will take mine. I cannot wait to see you on the other side. We will meet in the same place, in the courtyard with the unending sky, in the lap of the divine, and discuss our journeys over a shared cup of wine. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
This
Karuna.
is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really just like a tantalizing glimpse into a whole world of poems which I hope you will explore if you do buy the book, which I hope you will. And congratulations once again on your new book, Karuna. And Paromita, thank you for that discussion. Without any further ado, we'll continue with Poetry Cafe.